Gregor Samsa awoke one morning to find himself confronted by an unsettling truth. His reflection in the mirror appeared distorted, its features shifting slightly with every movement he made. He stared at it for some time, hoping the image would stabilize, but it remained elusive. The alarm clock rang as usual, pulling him reluctantly from bed. Its monotone buzz filled the room, echoing against walls that suddenly seemed too close. Gregor rose slowly, his limbs feeling heavier than they should. Everything around him felt familiar yet strange, as though reality had been subtly altered while he slept. He dressed mechanically, following the routine ingrained over years of repetition. Each button fastened, each shoelace tied, carried a faint sense of disconnection. The air in his apartment grew thick, pressing down on him like an invisible weight. Outside, the city bustled with life, oblivious to his unease. Gregor glanced again at the mirror before leaving, but the figure staring back avoided meeting his gaze. On the street below, people moved with purpose, their steps steady and determined. For once, Gregor hesitated, unsure if he belonged among them. The walk to work was unremarkable, yet everything seemed exaggerated. The pavement beneath his feet felt uneven, and the sounds of traffic were sharper, almost jarring. At the office building's entrance, he paused briefly, gathering resolve. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed softly, casting long shadows across polished floors. Colleagues greeted him with polite nods, unaware or perhaps unwilling to acknowledge anything unusual. Gregor nodded back, forcing a smile that felt foreign on his face. His desk awaited him, cluttered with papers and folders demanding attention. As he sat down, the chair creaked under his weight, drawing stares from nearby coworkers. Their expressions betrayed no overt suspicion, yet something lingered in their eyes, a flicker of curiosity or discomfort. Gregor opened the first folder, scanning documents whose meaning eluded him. Words swam together on the page, refusing to coalesce into coherent thoughts. Time passed imperceptibly. Minutes stretched into hours without clear demarcation. A supervisor approached mid-morning, clipboard in hand. "Gregor," he began, voice neutral but edged with concern, "there have been reports regarding your recent performance." Gregor looked up, startled by the directness of the question. He searched for words to explain, but none came readily. Instead, he mumbled vague assurances, promising improvement without specifying how. The supervisor frowned slightly, jotting notes onto his clipboard before moving on. Left alone, Gregor sank deeper into confusion, questioning whether his answers had satisfied or merely heightened scrutiny. By lunchtime, hunger gnawed at him, though food held little appeal. In the cafeteria, colleagues gathered in groups, sharing laughter and stories. Gregor joined them out of habit, though conversation proved difficult. Phrases slipped through his mind like water through fingers, failing to form solid connections. When asked about weekend plans, he responded vaguely, avoiding specifics. A colleague raised an eyebrow, sensing evasion, but said nothing further. Afterward, Gregor returned to his desk, where silence enveloped him once more. As afternoon wore on, tasks piled higher, creating an insurmountable barrier between Gregor and completion. Typing became laborious, each keystroke accompanied by a dull echo in his ears. Papers shuffled endlessly, their edges fraying despite careful handling. Occasionally, a coworker stopped by to ask questions, which Gregor answered tersely, eager to resume solitude. Yet even alone, peace eluded him. Shadows cast by overhead lights danced erratically across his desk, mocking his attempts at focus. By day's end, exhaustion overwhelmed him, yet sleep offered no respite. Gregor arrived at the office earlier than usual, hoping to complete his tasks before interactions became unavoidable. The building stood silent, its corridors empty save for the occasional janitor sweeping floors. He entered his workspace with relief, savoring the brief solitude. Yet as he sat down, the same unease returned, creeping over him like a chill. His reflection in the computer screen seemed distorted again, features blurring whenever he tried to focus. The morning passed slowly, each minute stretching longer than the last. Papers piled higher on his desk, their edges jagged and irregular. Typing reports felt increasingly futile. Words dissolved into meaninglessness, almost immediately after appearing on the screen. Gregor glanced around, wondering if anyone else noticed the strangeness of the day. But colleagues arrived, one by one, their steps brisk and purposeful, unaware or perhaps indifferent to his growing discomfort. A supervisor appeared shortly after 9, clipboard in hand. "Gregor," he said, stopping beside the desk, "could we discuss your recent performance?" Gregor froze, unsure how to respond. He nodded weakly, inviting the man to sit opposite him. The supervisor leaned forward, gaze steady but unyielding. "Your productivity has declined significantly," he continued, voice calm yet authoritative. "Is there something affecting your work?" Gregor opened his mouth to reply but found himself speechless. Words formed in his mind, jumbled and disjointed, refusing to take shape. He stammered an apology instead, promising improvement without offering specifics. The supervisor raised an eyebrow, jotting notes onto his clipboard. "We'll monitor the situation closely," he concluded, standing abruptly. As he walked away, Gregor watched his retreating back. Feeling smaller with each step, colleagues began approaching afterward, asking questions about projects or deadlines. Their voices sounded distant, muffled by an invisible barrier between them. Gregor responded mechanically, answering queries with minimal effort. Each interaction left him drained, as though pieces of himself were being chipped away. By mid-morning, he retreated further into silence, focusing solely on the documents before him. Lunchtime approached, bringing another wave of unease. In the cafeteria, colleagues gathered in clusters, laughing and exchanging stories. Gregor joined them reluctantly, carrying a tray laden with food that held no appeal. Conversation flowed easily among the group, except for him. Attempts to contribute faltered midway, leaving awkward pauses in their wake. A colleague raised an eyebrow, glancing sideways, but said nothing. Afterward, Gregor returned to his desk, where silence enveloped him once more. Tasks accumulated throughout the afternoon, forming an insurmountable wall. Typing grew laborious, each keystroke accompanied by a dull echo in his ears. Papers shuffled endlessly, their edges fraying despite careful handling. Occasionally, a coworker stopped by to ask questions, which Gregor answered tersely, eager to resume solitude. Yet, even alone, peace eluded him. Shadows cast by overhead lights danced erratically across his desk, mocking his attempts at focus. By day's end, exhaustion overwhelmed him, yet sleep offered no respite. As Gregor packed his bag to leave, he caught sight of his reflection in the glass door. It shifted slightly, features warping under scrutiny. He stared for a moment, transfixed, until the image dissolved entirely. Shaking his head, he turned away, stepping into the corridor. Outside, the city bustled with life, oblivious to his inner turmoil. Gregor walked home mechanically, following streets that seemed both familiar and alien. At his apartment door, he paused briefly, hesitating before unlocking it. Inside awaited another night of restless questioning, another confrontation with the unknown self staring back from the mirror. Days passed, each blending seamlessly into the next. Gregor's apartment became a prison of sorts, its walls closing in with every hour that ticked by. He no longer ventured outside, finding solace here, perhaps mere avoidance in the confines of his small living space. The phone rang occasionally, but he let it go unanswered, the shrill tones slicing through the oppressive silence, only to fade away moments later. Friends stopped calling altogether, their persistence waning until they, too, seemed to forget him. Gregor spent hours staring at the walls, their paint peeling in places where sunlight had faded it over time. Each crack and imperfection drew his gaze like a magnet, pulling him deeper into a labyrinth of thought. Was this truly his life now? A man trapped within four walls, disconnected from the world beyond? The question gnawed at him relentlessly, yet answers remained elusive, slipping through his fingers like water. Time lost all meaning. Days stretched endlessly, or compressed into fleeting instants, depending on his mood. The mirror in his bedroom became both a source of fascination and dread. Whenever he passed it, he glanced sideways, hoping to catch a glimpse of himself. But the image was never quite right. Features blurred, proportions skewed, as though reality itself refused to acknowledge him. On some mornings, the reflection would meet his gaze briefly, before dissolving into abstraction. Other times, it avoided eye contact entirely, as if ashamed of what it saw. Gregor began to wonder whether the distortion lay in the glass or in his own perception. Neighbors in the building avoided him whenever they crossed paths in the hallway. Their eyes darted away quickly, avoiding direct confrontation. Once, an elderly woman dropped her groceries when she saw him approaching. "Sorry," she muttered hurriedly, gathering the scattered items without looking up. Another neighbor, a young mother pushing a stroller, clutched her child protectively upon spotting him. These interactions or lack thereof only deepened Gregor's sense of alienation. He retreated further into his apartment, barricading himself against a world that seemed determined to reject him. His family made sporadic attempts to reconnect, sending messages or dropping by unannounced. His sister knocked once, voice trembling behind the door. "Gregor, are you okay?" she asked, though she didn't wait for an answer. Her visits grew less frequent after that, replaced by terse notes slipped under the door. "We're worried about you. Please call us." Eventually, even these stopped coming. Gregor wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or abandoned. Food delivery flyers accumulated in the hallway, their glossy pages mocking his isolation. He ordered sparingly, unable to muster much appetite despite the growing emptiness in his stomach. Meals arrived in plain brown bags, their contents consumed mechanically while seated at the kitchen table. The taste of everything seemed muted, as though his senses were shutting down one by one. Coffee, once a staple of his daily routine, now tasted bitter and uninspiring. Even the aroma failed to stir any pleasure. Sleep offered little reprieve. Nightmares plagued him, visions of endless corridors and shifting reflections chasing him through dreamscapes that mirrored his waking life. In these dreams, Gregor wandered aimlessly, searching for something, someone, but never finding them. Faces appeared momentarily, only to dissolve into mist before he could recognize them. Waking brought no clarity. Instead, the same questions lingered, unresolved and oppressive. Gregor began to notice changes in his surroundings that defied explanation. Objects moved slightly overnight, leaving faint traces of their previous positions. A chair stood askew where it had been perfectly aligned the day before. Papers on his desk rearranged themselves, forming patterns that resembled nothing meaningful. At first, he attributed these occurrences to his declining mental state. But as they persisted, he couldn't help wondering whether something or someone else inhabited his apartment when he slept. The television became a constant companion during those lonely nights. Its glow illuminated the room, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Gregor watched news programs, soap operas, documentaries all with equal detachment. Characters spoke lines that resonated faintly with his own experiences, yet their lives felt impossibly distant. Occasionally, he paused to consider the irony. Here he was, observing fictional struggles while grappling with his own inexplicable transformation. The screen reflected his face dimly, another distorted version of himself staring back. As weeks turned into months, Gregor's connection to the outside world weakened further. Letters piled up unopened on the counter, bills accumulating penalties he no longer cared to address. The city outside continued its ceaseless motion, oblivious to his retreat. Cars honked, pedestrians hurried past his window, streetlights blinked rhythmically through the night. Yet none of it reached him anymore. Gregor existed in a bubble of solitude, suspended between reality and whatever strange existence awaited him beyond the veil of understanding. One evening, as twilight settled over the city, Gregor sat by the window, watching the last rays of sunlight disappear behind the horizon. For the first time in what felt like ages, he allowed himself to cry. Tears streamed silently down his cheeks, pooling on the windowsill beneath him. There was no catharsis in the act, only exhaustiona, surrender to the weight of unanswered questions pressing down on him. When the tears finally subsided, he wiped his face with trembling hands and stared out at the darkness enveloping the world below. In that moment, Gregor realized something profound. He had become invisible not just to others, but to himself. His identity, once so firmly rooted in routines and responsibilities, had unraveled completely. What remained was a shadow of a man, clinging to fragments of memory and habit. And yet, amidst the despair, a spark of curiosity flickered. If he was no longer who he thought he was, then who might he become? The question hung there, fragile and uncertain, but undeniably present. Gregor received a letter one morning, its official seal bearing the insignia of a government office he could not place. The envelope was thick and heavy, its paper rough to the touch. He opened it carefully, unfolding a document filled with dense bureaucratic language. It instructed him to report immediately to an address listed in fine print at the bottom. No explanation accompanied the summons, only a warning that failure to comply would result in unspecified consequences. Gregor stared at the page for some time, hoping clarity might emerge from the jumble of words, but none came. The building loomed ahead, gray stone rising into the overcast sky. Its entrance was flanked by columns worn smooth by countless hands. Gregor hesitated before stepping inside, the air within cooler and heavier than outside. A receptionist sat behind a desk, her face obscured by stacks of papers. "I'm here for my appointment," Gregor said, voice barely audible. She nodded without looking up, pointing toward a corridor to his left. "Third door on your right," she replied, tone flat and uninterested. The hallway stretched endlessly, lined with identical doors marked by numbers in fading paint. Gregor walked slowly, each step echoing against the walls. At the third door, he paused, hand hovering above the handle. Inside, a room brimmed with clerks hunched over desks, their movements mechanical and precise. Papers shuffled rhythmically, creating a soft susurrus that filled the space. A man gestured for Gregor to approach, his expression unreadable. "Please fill out these forms," he said, sliding a stack across the desk. Gregor took them reluctantly, noting questions about his employment history, family background, and personal habits. Hours passed as Gregor worked through the paperwork, answering queries whose relevance eluded him. Occasionally, a clerk would approach, requesting additional details or clarification. Each interaction deepened his confusion, leaving him more disoriented than before. When he finally submitted the completed forms, the same man handed him another set. "These are for verification purposes," he explained. Though no further explanation followed, Gregor accepted them silently, retreating to a corner to begin anew. The process continued indefinitely, each stage leading only to another. Rooms blurred together, populated by faceless figures engaged in tasks that seemed both urgent and meaningless. Gregor lost track of time, meals consumed hastily between sessions of form filling. Clerks moved around him like shadows, their voices blending into a constant murmur. On occasion, he glimpsed other visitors, similarly trapped, their faces etched with exhaustion and resignation. None spoke. Communication appeared unnecessary in this labyrinthine world. At one point, Gregor found himself in a chamber dominated by a massive filing cabinet. Drawers slid open and shut automatically, releasing cascades of documents onto the floor. A supervisor stood nearby, observing the chaos with detached interest. "This is where all records are stored," he informed Gregor, voice carrying an undertone of pride. "Every detail of every individual passes through here." Gregor nodded, though understanding remained elusive. The sheer volume of information overwhelmed him, reducing individuals to mere entries in an endless ledger. Further along, he encountered a room filled with clocks ticking at varying speeds. Some raced forward, others lagged behind, creating a discordant symphony that reverberated through the space. A clerk adjusted dials obsessively, attempting to synchronize the mechanisms despite their apparent defiance. "Time management is critical," he muttered, glancing briefly at Gregor before returning to his task. The statement offered little comfort, adding yet another layer of complexity to the proceedings. As the day wore on, Gregor's resolve began to wane. Questions multiplied while answers dwindled, leaving him adrift in a sea of bureaucracy. He sought guidance from those around him, but they either ignored him outright or responded with cryptic remarks. Eventually, he approached the main desk once more, pleading for resolution. The receptionist looked up, her expression neutral. "You must continue," she stated simply, handing him yet another envelope. Inside lay instructions for tomorrow's session, which promised further clarifications regarding his case. Gregor left the building as night fell, streets dimly lit by flickering lamps. His reflection in shop windows appeared distorted, features shifting subtly with each step. Exhaustion weighed heavily upon him, but sleep offered no escape from the relentless cycle of forms and queries. Back in his apartment, he collapsed onto the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling. The events of the day replayed in his mind, forming patterns that defied logic. For the first time, Gregor wondered whether escaping this maze was even possibly or desirable. Perhaps, he thought fleetingly, becoming part of the system was the only way forward. Gregor awoke to the weight of his thoughts pressing down on him like an invisible force. The transformation had begun not in appearance, but in perception. Objects once familiar now seemed foreign, their shapes shifting subtly when observed too closely. He rose from bed with difficulty, as though gravity itself conspired against him. The room spun slightly, walls bending inward before snapping back into place. His reflection in the mirror avoided meeting his gaze, dissolving into abstraction whenever he tried to focus. Days blurred together, each one indistinguishable from the last. Gregor wandered through his apartment aimlessly, touching objects whose textures no longer registered properly. A chair felt softer than expected, a doorknob colder. Reality fractured around him, leaving fragments that refused to coalesce into coherence. Food tasted bland, its aroma diminished to mere suggestion. Coffee brewed without strength, its bitterness muted. Even sleep offered little respite, dreams tangling themselves into knots of confusion and despair. A moment arrived when Gregor realized resistance was futile. Acceptance came not as surrender but as liberation. What if he embraced this change instead of fighting it? The thought startled him at first, unsettling in its simplicity. Slowly, however, it took root. Growing stronger with each passing hour, he began to see beauty in the distortion, meaning in the absurdity. Shadows danced across walls, forming patterns that whispered secrets only he could decipher. Voices carried faint echoes of something ancient, layered beneath modern tones. The world outside shifted accordingly. Strangers appeared less alien, their faces softened by shared humanity. Conversations resumed naturally, though they remained one-sided. Gregor listened more than he spoke, absorbing words rather than contributing them. People moved past him on streets crowded with life, yet none truly noticed him anymore. This invisibility brought peace rather than isolation. He became part of the crowd, blending seamlessly to Spidier, perhaps because of his altered state. Within himself, Gregor discovered new depths. Memories surfaced unbidden, moments long buried resurfacing with startling clarity. Childhood games played in sunlit fields, laughter ringing pure and untainted. Later years filled with ambition and anxiety, goals pursued relentlessly until their pursuit became hollow. Now, stripped of pretense, he saw clearly for the first time. Purpose emerged not as destination but journey, fulfillment found in process rather than result. His relationship with objects changed as well. Tools once utilitarian gained significance beyond function. A pen scratched ink onto paper, creating lines that formed letters, which combined into sentences carrying weight far greater than their physical manifestation. Chairs supported bodies weary from effort, offering rest while demanding nothing in return. Even mundane items like keys or coins carried stories written in silent language, waiting patiently to be understood. Time lost all meaning, stretching infinitely or compressing immeasurably, depending on perspective. Minutes expanded into hours during periods of introspection, contracting abruptly when distractions intervened. Seasons passed unnoticed, marked only by subtle shifts in light and temperature. Gregor ceased marking days with calendars or clocks, relying instead on internal rhythms attuned to cycles deeper than human invention. One evening, seated by the window watching twilight descend, Gregor experienced clarity unlike anything before. The city below pulsed with energy, individual lives intertwining into complex patterns visible only to those willing to look closely. Connections formed and dissolved constantly, threads weaving tapestries rich with texture and color. He recognized himself within these patterns, neither central nor peripheral, simply present. Existence unfolded not as narrative, but as mosaic, each piece essential yet insignificant alone. This revelation did not bring closure but opened further questions. Who was he now? Separate from roles imposed by society. What purpose to find him beyond obligations fulfilled or avoided? Answers eluded him still, retreating whenever pursued directly. Yet their absence no longer troubled him. In uncertainty lay freedom, space for growth unencumbered by expectation. Gregor rose from his seat, stepping toward the door leading outside. For the first time in what felt like eternity, he left his apartment willingly, drawn by curiosity rather than necessity. Streets welcomed him warmly, shadows embracing his form without judgment. People glanced briefly, seeing neither stranger nor friend but fellow traveler navigating paths unknown. Laughter drifted from cafes, music spilled from open windows, scents wafted from kitchen saw elements, combining into symphony, celebrating existence itself. As night deepened, Gregor walked farther than intended, reaching edges of the city rarely visited. Here, buildings stood neglected, graffiti covering surfaces with vibrant declarations of defiance and hope. Children played spontaneously, their joy unfiltered by adult concerns. Elderly men sat on benches, sharing tales spanning lifetimes, voices resonating with wisdom earned through experience. Each encounter reinforced Gregor's growing understanding. Life thrived best when unbound by structure, flourishing wild and free. Returning home late, Gregor paused at the threshold, considering the journey ahead. Transformation continued, unfolding gradually like dawn breaking over mountains. He entered quietly, closing the door behind him. Inside awaited another day, another opportunity to explore boundaries between self and world. Sleep claimed him gently, dreams carrying forward threads woven throughout waking hours. When morning came, he would awaken again, ready to embrace whatever changes awaited. Gregor awoke to the same disorienting sensation that had become his new reality. The room around him shimmered faintly, as though viewed through water. He rose slowly, aware of the shift in his perception but no longer alarmed by it. Objects seemed both familiar and strange, their forms shifting at the edges when observed too closely. His reflection in the mirror avoided meeting his gaze, dissolving into abstraction whenever he tried to focus. The day unfolded with an eerie normalcy. Outside, the city bustled with life, oblivious to Gregor's transformation. People moved past him on the streets, their faces softened by shared humanity. Conversations resumed naturally, though they remained one-sided. Gregor listened more than he spoke, absorbing words rather than contributing them. Strangers appeared less alien, their presence comforting in its universality. He became part of the crowd, blending seamlessly dispirier, perhaps because of his altered state. Within himself, Gregor discovered depths previously hidden. Memories surfaced unbidden, moments long buried, resurfacing with startling clarity. Childhood games played in sunlit fields, laughter ringing pure and untainted. Later years filled with ambition and anxiety, goals pursued relentlessly until their pursuit became hollow. Now, stripped of pretense, he saw clearly for the first time. Purpose emerged not as destination but journey, fulfillment found in process rather than result. His relationship with objects changed as well. Tools once utilitarian gained significance beyond function. A pen scratched ink onto paper, creating lines that formed letters, which combined into sentences carrying weight far greater than their physical manifestation. Chairs supported bodies weary from effort, offering rest while demanding nothing in return. Even mundane items like keys or coins carried stories written in silent language, waiting patiently to be understood. Time lost all meaning, stretching infinitely or compressing immeasurably depending on perspective. Minutes expanded into hours during periods of introspection, contracting abruptly when distractions intervened. Seasons passed unnoticed, marked only by subtle shifts in light and temperature. Gregor ceased marking days with calendars or clocks, relying instead on internal rhythms attuned to cycles deeper than human invention. One evening, seated by the window watching twilight descend, Gregor experienced clarity unlike anything before. The city below pulsed with energy, individual lives intertwining into complex patterns visible only to those willing to look closely. Connections formed and dissolved constantly, threads weaving tapestries rich with texture and color. He recognized himself within these patterns, neither central nor peripheral, simply present. Existence unfolded not as narrative but as mosaic, each piece essential yet insignificant alone. This revelation did not bring closure but opened further questions. Who was he now, separate from roles imposed by society? What purpose defined him beyond obligations fulfilled or avoided? Answers eluded him still, retreating whenever pursued directly. Yet their absence no longer troubled him. In uncertainty lay freedom, space for growth unencumbered by expectation. Gregor rose from his seat, stepping toward the door leading outside. For the first time, in what felt like eternity, he left his apartment willingly, drawn by curiosity rather than necessity. Streets welcomed him warmly, shadows embracing his form without judgment. People glanced briefly, seeing neither stranger nor friend but fellow traveler navigating paths unknown. Laughter drifted from cafes, music spilled from open windows, scents wafted from kitchen saw elements combining into symphony, celebrating existence itself. As night deepened, Gregor walked farther than intended, reaching edges of the city rarely visited. Here, buildings stood neglected, graffiti covering surfaces with vibrant declarations of defiance and hope. Children played spontaneously, their joy unfiltered by adult concerns. Elderly men sat on benches, sharing tales spanning lifetimes, voices resonating with wisdom earned through experience. Each encounter reinforced Gregor's growing understanding. Life thrived best when unbound by structure, flourishing wild and free. Returning home late, Gregor paused at the threshold, considering the journey ahead. Transformation continued, unfolding gradually like dawn breaking over mountains. He entered quietly, closing the door behind him. Inside awaited another day, another opportunity to explore boundaries between self and world. Sleep claimed him gently, dreams carrying forward threads woven throughout waking hours. When morning came, he would awaken again, ready to embrace whatever changes awaited.